Dr. Leila, are you ready for part two?
Yes, thank you for having me again.
Let's do this.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Long live Palestine! Long live Palestine! From the river to the sea! From the river to the sea! Palestine will be free! Palestine will be free! From the river to the sea! From the river to the sea! Palestine will be free! Palestine will be free! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Long live Palestine! Long live Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Long live Palestine! Long live Palestine!
Salam, معكم Dalal, and this is episode 15 of the Vegans for Palestine podcast. Welcome to part 2 of the discussion on white veganism with both Dr. Leila and Rayan. In episode 12, the two discussed whiteness, white veganism, and Zionism as proximity to whiteness. In this episode, the focus is more on current examples of white veganism. Rayan discusses how the cultural appropriation of cuisine and foods among vegans can exhibit white veganism. Dr. Leila outlines how racism in vegan movements centralizes whiteness within veganism. Also, the two discuss how certain BIPOC vegans are complicit in white veganism, which ultimately harms non-human animals. They also discuss the relationships between white veganism, ex-vegans, racism, and Zionism. Just a quick disclaimer, the comments made in this episode do not necessarily reflect the views of people within the Vegans for Palestine community. Enjoy this one.
Zipporah the Vegan wrote a really good post about white veganism, and they wrote non-white vegans and all vegans who belong to marginalised groups know firsthand how living at different intersections complicates our existence. We are less likely to perpetuate harm in our activism because compassion is more intuitive to us. We understand the obstacles that can complicate and in some cases prohibit someone's ability to go vegan. Upholders of white veganism typically lack this understanding. White veganism is harmful because it enables folks to belittle non-vegans under the guise of fighting the good fight. Upholders of white veganism warp veganism into this exclusionary holier-than-thou cult to satisfy their egos and their savior complexes. It turns many people away from veganism. It can turn well-meaning vegans into misanthropes who do little to better the lives of animals, both human and non-human, which goes back to what you were saying before about how white veganism harms the animals, which is the ultimate irony of white veganism.
Yes, and I think she said, white veganism is harmful. And I did some more research, and I can't remember who said that. They said that actually white veganism is dangerous. And I totally agree with that. And I actually want to go back to the last time we spoke. So much has happened, and I really want to go back to what happened. And that really made me kind of reflect and realize something, which is a bit scary for me, I have to say. Sometimes when you realize something, you realize also there is so much unlearning. There are so many different layers, and we can only learn these new things when we experience it. So let me back a little bit. Last time we spoke, Iran was attacked unprovoked by Israel. And it wasn't really a surprise as such. We knew that it may happen, but still, when it happens, when something like that happens, you are really flooded by all these different emotions. And for me, the minute that I heard that the US has actually bombed Iran, it was early in the morning. I woke up and I heard that, the US has bombed Iran. And honestly, for those few seconds, I felt like the ground dropped from beneath me. And for a few minutes, I don't even know what I was imagining, but I really kind of imagined total destructions, the loss of everything. And that moment made me realize something. I thought, oh my God, this is what Palestinians have felt for 76 years. And, I have been advocating for free Palestine since I was 11. I grew up in Vienna, and I remember how I was the only foreigner in the school, in the class and in the school as well, but in the class defending Palestinians. I have always referred to Palestinians as my people. When I look at Palestinians, I see the faces of my own aunts and uncles. So that is how, close we are. And it is not just Palestine, I should say. The people of that region, what we call West Asia, we share so much, our struggles, our culture, our grief. So I feel a really deep sense of kinship with that region of the world. But again, that moment when Iran was bombed and I thought, that's it, I realized that, yes, we share a lot. When we say that a country is our identity, we don't just mean the people. It's the food, the language, the music, the literature, the memories, and all of that. That's why it is so important when, Israelis, for example, take hummus and falafel and talk about those foods as if it was their food and cuisine. But it is also the land. And I think that is something, again, Israelis will never understand. Why would they, or how could they destroy olive trees if they claim to love the land? You would never destroy the olive trees, uproot the olive trees, because olive trees are a symbol of that land. So if you were truly loving that land, you would never do that. And I think that is what white vegans will never understand. And again, when we talk about white vegans, we are talking about vegans who practice white veganism. They will never understand that for us being vegan, and I'm talking about vegans who are from the global south, for us being vegan and fighting for animal rights is not separate from fighting against colonialism and capitalism. For us, again, for those of us who are from the global south. And it doesn't matter whether we live in the West or whether we are still living in the global south. We are affected by that violence, by that colonial violence every single day. For Palestinians, it is occupation, bombings, starvations. For other countries, it is economic sanctions. And all of that, they are trying to kill us. And for us, in the West, it is racism, Islamophobia. And again, Islamophobia is not just about the religion. All Black and brown people are affected by, Islamophobia. We are discriminated because of that. So for us, being vegan is just not separate from that. We need to fight the empire, colonialism, capitalism. And a lot of white vegans, what they don't understand is that it's not just people who suffer in those countries. Animals suffer too, and we have seen so many images coming out of Gaza. I don't even go into some of the images that I saw, from recent bombings on Iran. White veganism, they don't get that. Veganism is the struggle for liberation, but white veganism has turned it into consumer choices, having more plant-based products. It's more like a lifestyle branding. So this is not liberation. And what I'm trying to say is, I'm just wondering, will they ever understand it? Is there any hope for the vegan movement? What are we going to do about it? How do we move forward?
In every social justice movement, unfortunately, whiteness is a problem, especially among so-called progressives. I also want to quickly go back to something you said before about your relationship with the Middle East and Iran. And as you were talking, I jumped back to a younger Rayan who was in Ramallah, and I was sitting with my late uncle, my khalo. And I remember we were watching the World Cup, and we're a Palestinian Christian family. And my uncle told me that, yes, we support Iran in the World Cup, even though they are not Arab. They have so much in common with us, and they are an Islamic nation the same way we are. That was one of the first experiences whereby I saw the story of Palestine and the story of Iran as I do in other parts of the Middle East, because of how much we've got in common culturally. And now we've got the Israeli apartheid colony bombing us. The only difference is that in Palestine for 76 years, they've engaged in a settler colonial project that involves stealing our land as well as murdering us, as well as genociding us. What you went through when you realized that the apartheid colony decided to engage in an unprovoked attack against Iran. It reminded me of what my life has been like for the past 2 years, ever since the Gaza genocide has taken off, whereby every day, the first thing I do is I get up and I check my social media accounts to see who is still alive. That has been my life, and that has been the life of every Palestinian and our allies for the past, it seems like 2 years now. An absolute nightmare. On the topic of whiteness, the West is used to seeing images of Palestinians living in tents, scraping for food, begging for scraps, bombed. The West is used to seeing those same images of Israel bombing Iran, bombing Lebanon, bombing Syria, because Arab and Iranian bodies don't matter to them. But when the West sees an image of a white settler in Tel Aviv who's in a bomb shelter that's whereby non-Jews and people of color have been excluded from, when she's on her phone screaming about her pain, even though she has a roof over her head, even though her circumstances are nothing like what people in Palestine face, the West has more sympathy for that person than they would for either of us. And racism is a huge part, and we can talk about Islamophobia, but whiteness is a huge part. It's because settler colonial societies, they see their story in the state of Israel. Their white bodies match the whiteness of the colony. And I know last time we talked about before how, yes, we know that the Israeli colony is a multicultural colony, but it is still a white-led colony. For vegans around the world who look at what's happening and think that it is not a vegan issue, nothing can be further from the truth. I came across an article by Mary Rolfs, and the article is called Dismantle White Veganism, but Don't Reject Veganism Altogether. Mary writes something really interesting about the relationship between veganism and white veganism is similar to that of, say, feminism and white feminism. Both movements have been and still are progressing through the work of people of color, work that has often gone unnoticed or uncredited. The white version of both movements is fundamentally opposed to the true goals of each movement, serving only white and often middle-class people at the expense of others, helping them benefit from oppressive systems rather than dismantling those systems entirely. White people who appropriate each movement refuse to acknowledge their own privilege and the constrained circumstances and choices others face that may limit their activism, contrasting with the intersectional approach both movements are pursuing. You said something before, Dr. Leila, about cultural appropriation that is definitely a part of white veganism. And I actually wrote that as one of the reasons why white veganism needs to be addressed, because of the way, especially white vegan vloggers love to talk about how they've, quote, discovered a new legume or discovered a new dal or discovered that za'atar exists or that hummus can be made with, quote, chocolate. That's disgusting. And, so it's the appropriation of vegan foods from the global south as explicit among Zionist vegans who move into other settler colonial societies or the global north, and they set up, quote, Middle Eastern food restaurants that are vegan, that are filled with food that is appropriated from Palestinians and other people in the Arab world. And yes, I know that there might be a Zionist out there that says, oh no, but what about the Iraqi Jews? They ate hummus. Well, obviously then their hummus is Iraqi hummus. The Moroccan hummus is different from Iraqi hummus, which is different from Iranian, which is different from Palestinian. We know that because that's our ancestral cuisine. It wasn't something we appropriated. But it occurs whereby there's an appropriation of vegan foods from the global south that takes place. And then there's a concoction of that version that is then presented as being, whether it be like ramen hummus, which I've seen before, which is so disgusting. Vegan African peanut stew is a common example. Vegan pad thai, as if, they are the custodians or the ones that created it. They put out cookbooks and make a lot of money on, how they supposedly discovered something when they went to India or when they went to, parts of West Asia. Vegan chocolate hummus. I mean, who the hell puts chocolate in hummus? That is so wrong. Like, I eat vegan bangers and mash, but I would never make a dessert version. That's disgusting. Come on. Yeah, cultural appropriation is a huge part. Have you witnessed that, Dr. Leila, in your endeavors?
Oh, yes. I remember actually the very first time I saw a white vegan chef, veganizing Iranian food. Firstly, they call it Persian food, and I have an issue with that because we are not all Persians. I'm not a Persian. I'm Iranian, but not Persian. I'm Azeri. So her saying that it is Persian cuisine is kind of suspicious to me. But anyway, she's a white vegan, and she has a school. And her whole school is based on veganizing Middle Eastern foods, but especially Iranian food. And she doesn't say where she has learned these recipes from. She doesn't give any background to where that food is coming from nothing. But she creates all these exotic, like kind of, Aladdin, kind of that kind of posts about Iranian food. Which is, again, you could argue Aladdin isn't really Iranian, but I'm not going to go there. And what really upset me once was that I veganized an Iranian dish, and she commented on my food and said, "Oh, I should have done it this way or that way." And I said, "No, I'm trying to get the taste the way my mom makes it." And she was still commenting, and I was like, "How on earth do you know that how my mom's cooking actually tastes? And you have the audacity to assume that you know more than me." And again, let's go back to where that comes from, this arrogance, it's not ignorance, it is really arrogance. And it is because we don't count. Black and brown people don't count. I don't even like to say our lives don't matter. We don't even exist for them as much as they are concerned. So whatever we do is theirs to take and do with that whatever they like to do. So that is what is happening. And that's why, I see a lot of people, they can't even say if Iranians are Arabs or not. They don't know all these distinctions, or, they don't understand that just because an Arab, Iraqi, is not the same as an Arab in Lebanon, Palestine, Egypt. There are so many different Arab countries. So they don't get all of that. And it is only because they don't care for us. They don't care to learn, because you can learn all of that. And let's go back to that blogger or all these vegan influencers who take our foods and veganize them and come up with these like kind of, "Oh, I discovered this," and they try to make money, because that is what is happening. They're actually trying to profit of our foods and cultures and traditions. And I think that is one of the main problems with white veganism. And when we say white veganism, we need to remember that is the mainstream veganism. It's not a small group. Right now, I don't feel hopeful about veganism. And that is because, as I said, the mainstream veganism is white. And what does that mean? That means mainstream veganism and those who follow it are the ones who get the funds. They have the platforms. They have the loudest voice. So they are representing what veganism is. And I'm going to give you some examples. And they actually, by the way, harming the animals while also exploiting BIPOC vegans. So let's take an example, the Vegan Society in the UK. I don't know if you're familiar with that story. A few years ago, they were accused of being racist and not a safe place for marginalized people. 5 trustees resigned. I never really looked into what happened exactly, because there was a lot of hearsay. But what happened afterwards is quite interesting. The Vegan Society brought an independent investigator who happened to be Black British. So by bringing somebody who was, Black, they tried to come off as independent, like kind of, genuinely interested in finding out if they are racist or not. And obviously, the investigator found out that there wasn't any evidence of racism. And I think that is really dangerous. And we see that a lot, these BIPOC. And I remember we mentioned that last time as well in our discussion. They actually helped white veganism. What they are doing is they are casting doubt on whether there was ever really any racism. I went through something similar myself, and I can empathize with those people from the Vegan Society who had to experience that, especially those who were BIPOC, because not all of them were actually BIPOC, but those who were BIPOC. Because what happens is there is a breach of trust, and that shapes you, that shapes how you interact with other vegans. Now, imagine you see Vegan Society partnering up with other BIPOC vegans. And that is something that I just saw a few days ago. They even said they have the new Vegan Society poster kids. That's what they called 2 BIPOC vegans joining them as ambassadors. When these people, these BIPOC, come and partner up with Vegan Society, which has a history of racism, or potential racism, let's call it, or alleged racism, they are actually kind of making other people doubt, was there really any racism? And those people who accused Vegan Society of racism, they don't have a large platform, because the average person wants peace. So they are more likely to believe the Vegan Society than those few who, talked about racism. The Vegan Society, all they needed to do is bring in a Black British investigator, say there is no racism, and they carried on. And I know, again, from my own experience, these big organizations, they just need to put one sentence statements that, oh, we are not racist, and everybody believes them. Everybody believes them because they want peace. They don't want to get engaged in all these conflicts. Whereas we as BIPOC vegans, when we accuse anybody of racism and bullying, we have to kind of produce pages of evidence. So that is one aspect of how white veganism can actually harm BIPOC or exploit them. Each time these big platforms, these big vegan organizations, they usually amplify certain vegans, right? So whether these vegans are BIPOC or not doesn't matter, but there are certain voices that these organizations like, and they amplify these voices. They give them a platform, and then those very vegans end up giving up on veganism. So basically, mainstream veganism promotes these people, helps them build a large platform, and when they are no longer vegan, a lot of non-vegans will say, oh, see, this person who was a loud advocate for veganism is no longer vegan. So, there is something wrong with veganism. So you see how in an indirect way, they are harming animals. And I saw that happen with a vegan personal trainer, a white vegan personal trainer, who suddenly started, eating eggs and calling himself plant-based. But prior to that, he was featured in a lot of plant-based publications. Everybody loved him. But so imagine, he already has a huge platform, and suddenly he said, oh, actually, it's okay to eat eggs. So the damage he's doing, to veganism. And another example is a very famous one, Ali Tabrizi, the director of Seaspiracy. And after October 7, he went on being a full Zionist. And then later he came on and said, oh, I'm no longer vegan. So again, somebody quite famous, everybody knows him, non-vegans know him, and he comes and says, well, I'm not a vegan anymore. So can you imagine the damage he's actually causing to veganism and to animal rights? And I think that is one aspect. Again, there are so many layers of white veganism and how they are actually harming animals. Another aspect, and we have spoken about that in the past as well, we have these BIPOC vegans who are darlings of the white vegan organizations. One of them is Seb Alex. And I know I'm going to get some hate for saying this because I know he's quite popular among people in West Asia as well, among vegans in West Asia. And I'm sure he's doing great work, but that doesn't change the fact that he's simply practicing white veganism. And he's helping these white vegan organizations to perpetuate their own myths. For example, just his organization, the Middle East Vegan Society. We really should stop calling it Middle East. That is a colonial term. I know some people say, yeah, but then people wouldn't understand it when we say West Asia. When we say Middle East, everybody knows what we are talking about. What he also, I should say, his organization, I saw recently that they shared a post by an Iranian vegan. So the post was actually about animals, but that Iranian vegan is a Zionist. So remember, each time you're platforming someone, you're amplifying their voice. So by actually sharing one of his posts, they are giving that person, that Iranian Zionist, and their opinions credibility. And this is important because this is the same Iranian vegan who referred to Ingrid Newkirk, the founder of, or the president of PETA. He said she's the Rosa Parks of the vegan movement. So imagine you're giving a platform to this person.
Yes, that is so wrong. What the hell? That's disgusting.
Yes, the audacity to think that you can compare a white person to somebody who is a symbol of resistance. And on top of that, this white person happens to be a Zionist.
Going back to that example of the vegan society, what I've learned in white spaces, in every, especially in Western settler colonial societies, if you call something racist, that's apparently more offensive than actual racism. People will go out of their way to prove something is, quote, not racist, as opposed to actually challenge racism. Because for a lot of white vegans, BIPOC vegans need to be there to provide the exotic food that can then be commercialized, appropriated, and then, quote, veganized by people who are outside of the culture. The example you gave of the vegan society, it doesn't surprise me that that happens because that is symptomatic of a lot of institutions that enable structural racism. As for Ali Tabrizi, who is a right-wing, who went to the extreme right, I think I saw a couple of videos whereby the crux for him in terms of going from vegan to non-vegan was the idea that he couldn't find vegan marshmallows. That is just so pathetic. But at the same time, when he produced Seaspiracy, it's my understanding that he was very, very silent on Palestine. And then he came out as a hardcore Zionist and no longer a vegan. So he went from being the poster child for a lot of white vegans in that here is a BIPOC vegan who doesn't say anything about racism to someone who supports the genocide, unfortunately, but someone who has, from what I've seen, networked with a lot of extreme right, anti-feminist, anti-abortion activists. Where you find Zionism, you find bigotry. Where you find Zionism, you find internalized Islamophobia, or where you find internalized Orientalism. And what I've learned is that the Zionist movement loves to search and search and search for the token Arab, who will then be funded with all these speaking tours and all these opportunities. In terms of a career trajectory, it's almost like BIPOC vegans need to have a place within vegan movements whereby we have to share the vegan elements of our culture, which can be appropriated. And we're not allowed to mention racism. We're not allowed to mention genocide. We're not allowed to mention that, bombing people is not vegan. Starting a war against another nation is not vegan. But settler colonialism surely is not vegan. The theme there is white saviorism, because BIPOC vegans need to reassure white veganism that they are doing the work of white saviorism. And going back to that comment by, who was it? Was it Ali that said about Rosa Parks? Who was it that said that?
It is an Iranian vegan in the States. His name is Faraz Harsini. I'm sure he happily, proudly stands by his comment that he's a Zionist and he was supporting Israel's bombing on Iran at the moment. He was supporting that, so rooting for Israel. And so I'm sure he's really proud of himself. So yeah, it is Faraz Harsini who said that.
What a oh my God. And eventually, and like you said before, a lot of these BIPOC vegans who actually get manipulated and used and appropriated by the movement end up leaving veganism, and they become, and that's the other thing I've noticed as well in terms of the ex-vegan movement, a lot of them become Zionists and become, right wing. And so there's this pipeline that I think there's a paper in this, Dr. Leila, honestly, there's a paper somewhere that charts the pipeline between white veganism that goes to Zionism and the extreme right and racism, which is what they all have in common.
When we are talking about all these vegans who end up being Zionists or even ex-vegans, my question is, were they in it for the animals or just for the fame, power, and status? And I'll go back to my first point that mainstream veganism is the one which gets the funding. All of these people, and there have been so many examples, they get paid trips to India, for example, for a whole year, visiting different universities and colleges and giving talks. Somebody's paying for that. So somebody's paying you money to go on a trip, promote yourself, have your face everywhere. So you're actually increasing your status, your power, and there is something intoxicating about power, about status. So it's not always about money, just having your face everywhere. People like oh, we are so grateful to you. So there is something intoxicating about that. And that makes me wonder, are they actually in it for the animals? And my next question is it still called activism when you rely on somebody else's money? Because that is something we saw with the AVA summit. If you had to attend a summit because your funding depends on that, is that activism or just a normal job?
I think that's a question that vegans who are listening should ponder, and they can come to their own conclusions, I suppose. Unfortunately, if you are in Palestinian vegan spaces or Iranian vegan spaces, you need to have a conversation about white veganism and the impact that it has. With the exception of Seb Alex, I know of a lot of Arab, Armenian, Iranian, Iraqi, Assyrian vegans who refuse to actually engage with Western institutions. And so when you do have a success story whereby one, quote, Middle Eastern vegan is having so much traction with Western vegan movements, you've got to ask yourself, what exactly are they doing? Why are they so white in their veganism? When someone makes comments about, the white lady who founded PETA as being the Rosa Parks of the animal rights movement, The only thing I can say to that is, oh my God, that is so freaking white. That's beyond cringe.
I would like to add that as BIPOC vegans, it is our responsibility to talk to our people. And I'm saying that, for example, with Seb Alex, again, I appreciate everything that he's doing, but I feel sometimes that he's only talking to the elite in the quote Middle East. He's not really catering or accommodating those people who are struggling in the, in our countries. His organization wrote a piece on vegan restaurants in Iran. Firstly, I asked them not to do it because it was during the woman life freedom movement, and I thought, you writing a piece in English is actually kind of promoting tourism, and at the moment we shouldn't really do that because our people are struggling, they are protesting for their freedom. So anyway, they used Happy Car app to write a piece on vegan restaurants in Iran, in Tehran, and all the restaurants are super expensive. The average Iranian cannot afford to eat there. I'm not even sure if I could go to Iran, would I be able to eat in those restaurants? That is how expensive they are. So I'm just wondering, who are you writing for? And the same goes with for another vegan. He's a Muslim. I think he's an Indian. And whenever he writes, and he talks a lot about Islam, in his posts, and I'm always asking myself, who are you writing for? For the vegan, for fellow Muslims in India, or for the Western audience who is applauding you and saying, oh yes. So you're actually kind of demonizing Muslims and Islam to get applaud, really. That's what he's getting, likes. And I don't know, is he getting any funding? I really don't know. But that's why I'm feeling like a lot of it is not about animals anymore. Because if it was about true liberation, I don't even like to call it just for animals. I like to refer to it as true collective liberation, because if we don't have that, we'll never have animal liberation. So, and I just think, we need to ask ourselves and be honest. This is okay. To be honest, I don't have any problem with people attending the AVA summit if they were honest about it, instead of trying to say, no, this is different. We are going to protest, against Omri Paz being a speaker. Instead of talking a lot about all of that, they could have said, look, I know, I wish I could boycott the event because of Omri Paz. For those people who don't know, Omri Paz is the founder of Vegan Friendly, and he actually raised funds, and I think he's still, raising funds to feed the IOF soldiers vegan meals, because when you are killing Palestinians, you should make sure that you eat animal-free products, animal vegan meals. It's so important, to make sure that you are still the most moral army in the world. So you could say, I wish I could boycott the event, but I cannot because then I won't get the money. But then, as I already mentioned, then you really need to question what you are really doing. And I really believe that what all these people are doing is they say, oh, we are trying to help the animals and we need the funds. We can only do the work we are doing because we need the funds. I just think, we cannot cut corners. We cannot start saying, oh, for the sake of animals, I am going to do this. Just to give you an example, imagine somebody says, I'm going to rescue animals, and in order to fund that rescue, that effort, I'm going to sell knives to the killers of those animals. But that money I'm going to make from the sale of those knives, I'm going to use to rescue those animals. Does that make sense? No, and that is white veganism.
Yeah, it's advocating for animals in ways that annihilate them. Ooh. Now it makes sense as to what you said before and the last time you joined me about how white veganism is actually really harmful for the animals. An Israeli missile that is dropped all over residential areas, which have both human and non-human animals, could have been dropped by a vegan. And that's the other thing that really frustrates me about a lot of vegan movements. The idea that apparently Iranian vegans have so much in common with Israeli vegans, and Israeli vegans have so much in common with, Palestinian vegans. Zionist vegans do not have anything in common with us. Nothing at all. What you said before about how those really disgusting metaphors, claiming that a white lady who started PETA is apparently the founder, is apparently like Rosa. I still can't get over that. Is apparently akin to Rosa Parks. Like, get the hell out of here. Like, who has the audacity or the caucasity to say that?
It goes back to the colonial mindset. And I'm going to give a very simple, definition. The colonial mindset likes to oversimplify complex systems. So they don't want to see all the different aspects of and oppression, for example, because oppression, there are different aspects to when it comes to oppression, and also different aspects when it comes to any relationship, and that can be the relationship of one human to an animal, but also that human to the land and that animal to the land. And part of the colonial mindset is that they are not comfortable with not knowing. They're not comfortable with not having an answer. So they don't want to sit with the discomfort of uncertainty, of not having a solution. So they want to come up with a solution all the time. So we have service dogs. What are we going to do about that? Good or bad? Instead of actually sitting with it, or feeding your cats and dogs non-vegan food. Bad. It is just always they have a solution instead of actually saying, what, I don't know. And the same goes with the same goes to what I was saying earlier about your activism needing funds, and where does that fund come from? I'm okay with people saying, yeah, actually it sucks that I have to accept these funds from some like kind of not ethical organizations. I don't have any problem with that. But instead of actually trying to whitewash it and say, oh, no, they're actually ethical, you don't understand it. I appreciate transparency. And I think, again, that is a problem with the colonial mindset, that they don't like complex systems. They take everything out of context. And going back to where I started, is there any hope for the vegan movement?
That's a really, really good question. Is there any hope? There's very little.
اهدى، ما هو كل شي باين في المحنة. الله بيشهد مين احنا، رجالة ضمن طرطش لك بنضرب حرب الليلة ما بنغلب. بدك شبال وعادي منهد لك، مرحب فيك في ولاد القدس، مندبر حالنا نحل اللغز. رنيت على نفحة وكل بخش وقت شفنا وياما وكله بصف، ولا مرة نخاف ولا مرة ونص. بدك بركان بنفقع بوف، نعمل لك حفلة تخش تنط، نستقطب مال بس بدنا نقص. ما هو كله عارف، ما هو كله شايف، ما هو كله خايف والدنيا ترص. استجدع دايما ووعك بحش، انا ادرينالين فاجع بشباب بنضرب الغاز. احنا الجدعان والزينة قليل، رد بالك عم تعيشها بليش. سوي واعمل واجمع كاش، ما الدنيا صعيبة وبدها سلام. سيبك من روح واحضر لك جاي، انا قرش انا قرش انا قرش انا سمكة، وصحابي ملان في الجلمة. نشنع نعمل غلبة تجينا يا خالي، بناخد العتبة تخوف بالليل ندوي لك عتمة. بشوف تنساش انا زي النوس، سلاح فتاك في بغز رجال تحفر انفاق، ترجع بشوال وملينا اشلاء. بلاجين 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 بالجدعنة، انا فاتح دكان منبيعش هلسات، والدم مسموح بس للسباع. مكتوب على القرمة قسم لو غاد، احنا جن بنطلع ما بتشوفناش، ودموع ما تسيل اذا فش مسيل. نحن الشجعان ان قد انا اوانه، وبنبخ وطني بيع مزانه. وكيف بسعر صوت نص ولاد والشال حط كله طرح بمكانه. وان قد انا اوانه، وبنبخ وطني بيع مزانه. وكيف بسعر صوت نص ولاد والشال حط كله طرح بمكانه.
حتموت من الرعب من الارض نطلع زي الجن بخ. هدي اللعب على هذا نترك على النار الافكار تنطخ. اختراق ورا حدا اذا بلغ، انا مش مركب بركبش مع حدا. انا فين ان امكانيك البلد بالبقلك ديك بين رعوة غنم. انا جيت انا ديك طلعت تحلم، نحكي حقيقة دقيقة تنفهم فيش وقت بضيع. شباشة حفيدي بديك في فلاشة ما فيش رحميم. انا يوم بحتاجك اجيك نعمل بلغان بطريقة طليق تفصيل على عدا العدل. شو جديد انا جيك ببور بالطور بالعرض، وماكينة عريض وفريد من نوعه كمين المخا. كس اخت كل مين باع واختفى، صدوا الوقت ولا عمره ارتخى. يكتم سربر نفط ورادار هلسات على طول بيعرفكم شو دبور على طول وبيقول واو.
ان قد انا اوانه، وبنبخ وطني بيع مزانه. وكيف بسعر صوت نص ولاد والشال حط كله طرح بمكانه. وان قد انا اوانه، وبنبخ وطني بيع مزانه. وكيف بسعر صوت نص ولاد والشال حط كله طرح بمكانه. ان قد انا اوانه، وبنبخ وطني بيع مزانه. وكيف بسعر صوت نص ولاد والشال حط كله طرح بمكانه. وان قد انا اوانه، وبنبخ وطني بيع مزانه. وكيف بسعر صوت نص ولاد والشال حط كله طرح بمكانه.